At 9:17 on the morning of January 22nd, 1943, the world was a furnace. A green, steaming, suffocating hell called Guadalcanal. Crouched low amidst the splintered palm logs and shattered concrete of a destroyed Japanese bunker, Second Lieutenant John George felt a bead of sweat trace a path from his temple down his jaw. He was 27 years old, a state champion rifleman from the flatlands of Illinois, and officially he had 0 confirmed combat kills to his name. The air, thick with the scent of cordite, rotting vegetation, and death, was so humid it felt like breathing water. West of Point Cruz, the jungle wasn't just a place. It was a living entity, an adversary that watched with a million unseen eyes. In his hands, George cradled something utterly alien to this battlefield, an object no other American soldier in the entire Pacific Theater carried into the fight. It was a Winchester Model 70, a civilian hunting rifle chambered in the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge. Perched atop its receiver was a 2.5 power Lyman Alaskan scope, a piece of glass more accustomed to spotting white-tailed deer in a quiet autumn wood than enemy soldiers in the jungle. It was, by every military definition, a civilian's gun, a sportsman's tool. To his superiors, it was a curiosity. To his fellow grunts, it was a joke. But John George hadn't lugged this beautiful piece of polished walnut and blued steel halfway across the world to impress officers or entertain enlisted men. He had come to Guadalcanal for one brutally specific purpose. In the last 72 hours, the ghosts in the trees had been busy. 14 men of the 132nd Infantry Regiment were dead. 14 American soldiers, picked off one by one, their lives extinguished by the sharp crack of an Arisaka rifle. They were being hunted from the canopy, stalked by expert Japanese snipers who materialized, killed, and then vanished back into the suffocating green tapestry of the jungle. The hunters had become the hunted. And now, John George was here to hunt the hunters. If you want to witness how one American's civilian rifle took on an army of jungle warfare specialists and forever changed the doctrine of the U.S. military, then smash that like button. Your support helps us unearth more of these forgotten stories of heroism. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the incredible conclusion. But first, you need to understand precisely why John George, an officer in the United States Army, was carrying a hunting rifle to war. This was no ordinary soldier. Long before the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor dragged America into the global conflict, George was something of an obsessive. Back home in Illinois, his world revolved around the crisp scent of gunpowder and the quiet discipline of the shooting range. He was a hunter, a marksman, a man who understood the intricate ballet of ballistics, windage, and elevation not as a science, but as an art. In 1939, he'd proven his mastery, winning the state shooting championship. When war came, he saw a fundamental truth that the monolithic U.S. Army, with its focus on mass-produced material and standardized doctrine, refused to admit. America's standard-issue rifles were woefully inadequate for the specialized, lethal craft of sniping. The M1 Garand was, without question, a magnificent weapon of war. For the common infantryman, it was a godsend. Semi-automatic, firing from an 8-round en-bloc clip, it was reliable, rugged, and delivered a volume of fire that stunned its enemies. It was the rifle that would win the war. But for the precision shooter, for the man tasked with delivering a single, perfect shot from hundreds of yards away, the Garand had a fatal flaw. Its design, which ejected spent clips upwards from the top of the receiver, made mounting a telescopic sight a practical impossibility. The Army's designated sniper rifle, the Springfield 1903, did exist, but it was a relic of a previous war, and they were heartbreakingly rare. The military simply didn't have enough to go around, and the scopes they came with were often of poor quality, fragile, poorly calibrated, and notoriously incapable of holding a zero in the brutal conditions of combat. But George knew of a better weapon. He knew of a rifle so accurate, so reliable, that it had been dubbed the rifleman's rifle. It was the Winchester Model 70 he had used for years to hunt deer in the dense woods of Illinois. This wasn't just a tool to him. It was an extension of his own body. He knew, with an instinct born of thousands of rounds fired, exactly how it would perform at 200, 300, even 400 yards. He knew the subtle, almost imperceptible way a crosswind would nudge the .30-06 bullet on its journey. He knew how the heat, rising from the barrel after several shots, could alter the point of impact. It was a knowledge so deep, so ingrained, it was part of his very soul. So, he did something almost unthinkable for a junior officer in the rigid hierarchy of the U.S. Army. He wrote a letter, not to his commanding officer, not to the Ordnance Department, but directly to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. He explained the dire situation, the desperate need for a true precision weapon, and made an audacious request. Could they please ship his personal hunting rifle to his APO address on Guadalcanal? In a move that speaks volumes about the can-do spirit of the American home front, Winchester agreed. The rifle arrived on the island in a long wooden crate in December of 1942. When George unboxed it in front of his comrades, the polished walnut stock gleaming under the tropical sun, the reaction was exactly what he had anticipated. Laughter. Loud, condescending, and utterly dismissive. "Gonna hunt some deer in the jungle, Lieutenant," one sergeant barked, a wide grin splitting his mud-caked face. "Japs ain't venison, George," another chimed in. "That pretty little toy won't last a day in this climate. The humidity will warp that fancy stock before you even fire a shot." George offered no reply. He didn't argue or defend his choice. He simply, methodically, cleaned his rifle, attached the Lyman scope, and began the painstaking process of calibrating it, firing precious rounds into a distant palm tree until he was certain it was perfectly zeroed. Then, he waited for his chance. That chance arrived with the blood-soaked dawn of January 22nd. His colonel, a man pushed to the brink by the mounting casualties, gave him the mission. A simple, desperate order: eliminate the snipers who were bleeding Company C dry. George accepted without hesitation, but with one non-negotiable condition. He would go alone. No spotter, no fire support, no escort. His logic was cold, hard, and born of a hunter's instinct. The Japanese snipers were masters of stealth, working alone or in pairs. A squad of American GIS crashing through the undergrowth would be heard a mile away, and the enemy would simply melt back into the jungle. He had only one chance, and it required him to move not as a soldier, but as a predator. He had to move in silence. He had to become a hunter once more. At 8:30 a.m., George slipped out of the American perimeter. His loadout was Spartan. His Winchester, 40 rounds of .30-06 ammunition, a K-bar fighting knife, 2 canteens of water, and nothing else. The jungle of Guadalcanal was an inferno of green. 95% humidity clung to him like a shroud, while the temperature soared past 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Clouds of mosquitoes descended upon him, a living, buzzing torment. And somewhere out there, hidden among the giant ferns and canopy of trees, were men trained from birth in the art of killing Americans without ever being seen. George moved with a slowness that was agonizing, a deliberate, calculated grace. Every footstep was placed with purpose, tested before his full weight was committed, ensuring no twig would snap, no dry leaf would rustle. He was a ghost in his own right. At 9:05 a.m., he heard it. The sharp, distinct crack of a single rifle shot, echoing from the northwest, about 300 yards away. Someone had just died. Without pausing, George altered his course, moving silently, inexorably toward the sound of death. At 9:12 a.m., he found what he was looking for. Not a man, but a sign. The broad, green leaves of a banana tree were trembling, moving in a way that was completely unnatural. The air was dead calm. There was no wind. The movement was human. George melted to the ground, the damp earth cool against his fatigues. He brought the Winchester to his shoulder, the familiar feel of the walnut stock a comfort against his cheek. Through the Lyman scope, the world snapped into focus. He estimated the range, 240 yards, and waited, his breathing slow and steady, his heart beat a calm drum in his ears. At 9:15 a.m., the Japanese sniper made his first and last mistake. He shifted his position, seeking a better firing angle on the American lines. For a fleeting 2 seconds, his silhouette was clearly visible against the dark trunk of the tree. George didn't think. He acted. He exhaled, held his breath, and the rifle bucked against his shoulder. The sound of the shot was a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. The Japanese soldier tumbled from his perch, falling 90 feet to the jungle floor. First sniper eliminated. George didn't move. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even allow himself the luxury of a deep breath. His hand moved with practiced, fluid efficiency, working the bolt action of his Winchester. The motion was smooth, almost silent. He ejected the spent brass casing, chambered a fresh round, and brought his eye back to the scope. He kept watching, his focus absolute, because he knew something that many American soldiers learned too late and at too great cost. Japanese snipers rarely worked alone. At 9:21 a.m., his patience paid off. About 180 yards from his position, another sniper, the first one spotter and partner, made the fatal error of trying to locate the source of the shot that had killed his comrade. He moved. The moment his head broke cover, George fired again. A second crack echoed through the jungle. Second sniper eliminated. 2 shots. 2 kills. George immediately began to withdraw from his position. He knew the professional's creed. Never fire more than twice from the same location. It was the golden rule of precision shooting. By now, the Japanese knew there was an American marksman in the area. If he stayed put, he would become the hunted. He moved 400 yards to the east, finding a natural depression in the terrain that offered both cover and a good field of view. He settled in, his eyes scanning every leaf, every shadow. The hunt had resumed. At 10:03 a.m., he identified movement high in the canopy of a massive kapok tree, 320 yards out. This one was harder. The sniper was expertly camouflaged, with only a small, fleeting patch of his uniform visible through the dense foliage. George adjusted the scope, compensating for the elevation and the distance. He breathed in, out, and in again, holding the air in his lungs. He squeezed the trigger. The body crashed down through the branches before thudding onto the ground below. Third sniper eliminated. 46 minutes into his one-man operation. At 10:47 a.m., George located another sniper nest. This time, it was 2 shooters working in tandem from separate positions within the same massive tree. It was a foolish tactical error. They believed they could cover each other, but George saw their weakness. If one fell, the other would instinctively react, revealing his own position in the process. George decided to exploit that human reflex. He sighted on the first man and fired. The Japanese soldier fell from his perch. Just as George predicted, the second shooter whirled around to see what had happened. In that split second of distraction, George worked his rifle's bolt with lightning speed. The empty casing arced through the air. The new round slid into the chamber. Before the second sniper could even register the threat, George fired again. Fourth and fifth snipers eliminated. 2 shots in less than 4 seconds. An act of rifleman artistry in the heart of the world's deadliest jungle. If you're still watching, you're not just a viewer, you're a witness to history. Subscribe now so you don't miss the final, incredible outcome of John George's hunt. By noon, the jungle floor was littered with his work. John George had eliminated 7 Japanese snipers. He had fired 9 rounds, missing only twice when his targets had moved at the precise instant of the shot. But the jungle was beginning to take its toll. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on him, draining his strength. He had consumed nearly all the water in his canteens, and he knew that the Japanese were no longer just on alert. They were actively hunting him. Their tactics would change. They would become more cautious, more deadly. George made the decision to return to the American perimeter. He reported his results to the colonel. The man's face was a mask of disbelief. 7 confirmed kills? With that hunting rifle? George simply nodded. "How much ammunition did you use, Lieutenant?" the colonel asked, his voice low. "9 rounds, sir." The colonel stared at him for a long, silent moment, the gears turning in his head. Then he did something George never expected. "Lieutenant, I want you to train my best marksmen. Teach them what you know." George accepted. But first, he had a job to finish. The remaining snipers were still out there, and they were still killing Americans. On January 23rd, George went back into the jungle. This time, the atmosphere was different. The Japanese knew a new predator was in their midst. Their snipers were more mobile, changing positions every few minutes, no longer lingering in the trees. But their increased movement also made them more vulnerable. Every move was a chance to be detected. At 8:45 a.m., George identified a sniper descending from a tree to relocate. It was the moment of maximum vulnerability. George fired while the Japanese soldier was hanging from a branch, his rifle slung over his back. 8 sniper eliminated. At 10:22 a.m., another shooter made the mistake of engaging an American patrol just 150 yards from George's hiding spot. The bright muzzle flash from his Arisaka rifle gave away his exact location. George waited 30 seconds. He knew the sniper would move after firing, and he knew precisely where he would go, towards the nearest dense cover, a thicket of tree ferns about 15 yards from his original position. When the Japanese soldier's head emerged from between the ferns, George was waiting. 9th sniper eliminated. January 24th was different. A quiet had fallen over the western sector of Point Cruz. The Japanese had finally realized what was happening. Their commanders, recognizing that their elite snipers were being systematically exterminated, had ordered the survivors to pull back to positions deeper inland. But 2 of them never got the order. At 2:30 in the afternoon, George located an isolated shooter in a palm tree 280 yards away. The soldier was staring intently towards the American perimeter, completely oblivious to the fact that the real danger was now behind him. 1 shot, a clean kill. 10th sniper eliminated. The 11th was the most difficult of all. At 4:45 p.m., as the sun began to dip low and the jungle shadows grew long and distorted, George saw an unnatural reflection. It was the faint glint of light off a telescopic sight. This one was a true professional. He was 340 yards away, the longest shot of the entire operation. The Japanese shooter was perfectly concealed, with only a tiny portion of his shoulder visible between the leaves. It was an exceptionally difficult shot, one that most marksmen wouldn't even attempt. George ran the calculations in his head, factoring in the elevation, the wind, the extreme distance. He took a breath, let out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The glint of light vanished. The leaves in the distance rustled violently. And then silence. 11th sniper eliminated. George returned to camp as dusk fell. In 4 days of solitary operations, he had hunted down and eliminated 11 trained Japanese snipers. He had fired 17 rounds at enemy marksmen and scored 14 hits, an astonishing effectiveness rate of 82%. And he had done it all with the toy rifle his comrades had mocked. But this was not the end of John George's story. It was just the beginning of his legend. The Winchester Model 70 he carried on Guadalcanal fundamentally changed the way the United States military thought about sniper rifles. After the war, George, the quiet hunter from Illinois, wrote a manual on precision shooting that became required reading for Army marksmen. In its pages, he championed the use of bolt-action rifles with high-quality optics over standard-issue semi-automatics without scopes. "A sniper does not need volume of fire," he wrote. "He needs one perfect shot. He needs a rifle he knows like his own hand, and a scope he can trust with his life. Everything else is secondary." The Army eventually listened. In 1966, when the United States found itself embroiled in another jungle war in Vietnam, its snipers carried precision bolt-action rifles equipped with telescopic sights. Many of them, including the legendary Carlos Hathcock, used the very same model that George had carried to Guadalcanal 23 years earlier, the Winchester Model 70. Hathcock, the most famous sniper of the Vietnam War, with 93 confirmed kills, considered his Winchester Model 70 to be the perfect extension of the rifleman. The doctrine that John George had proven with blood and steel in the jungles of Guadalcanal had become standard military practice. The torch had been passed, but there is something more, something the official military records can never capture. After the war, John George returned to Illinois. He went back to hunting deer. He went back to competing in shooting tournaments. He lived a quiet life, far from the suffocating heat of the jungle and the chilling echoes of war. When asked about his time on Guadalcanal, he always said the same thing. I wasn't a hero. I was just a hunter. The only difference was that on Guadalcanal, the prey was hunting me back. He was right. And that simple, humble truth makes his achievement all the more extraordinary. The Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal were not amateurs. They were hardened veterans trained for years in jungle warfare. They knew the terrain. They had the advantage. They were masters of their craft. And yet, a deer hunter from Illinois, with a rifle he'd had mailed to him, hunted them down and eliminated them one by one. 11 snipers. For days. 17 shots. One hunting rifle. Sometimes, the best weapon isn't the most technologically advanced or the most expensive. Sometimes, the best weapon is simply the one a rifleman knows better than anyone else on Earth. John George knew his Winchester, and that intimate knowledge saved countless American lives in one of the most brutal campaigns of the Pacific War. They laughed at his rifle when he arrived on Guadalcanal. No one was laughing when he left. What do you think of this incredible story? Did you know about the pivotal role John George and his Winchester Model 70 played in shaping the American sniper tradition? Let us know in the comments below. For more verified, fascinating stories that change the course of history, subscribe to our channel and make sure you